Hey up everybody and welcome back. Well, I'm safely returned from camping and I didn't drown kayaking or anything like that. So, as you saw, this is part one. Last video I sort of showed you what the project was and we had a quick look and some thoughts, but since then I've been giving it a more serious looking at and giving it a lot more thought, and I've found a couple of things which are going to modify our plan a little bit. I was still a little bit backwards and forwards whether I should just restore it as a road bike, the original way it was. But as I say, well, two things. One, I do want to sell it, and I think it would be more likely to sell as the Trials replica, and also I think it might just be a little bit boring, not only for you watching but for me as well, if I just sort of strip this, paint it, put it back together. So what we're going to do is we're definitely going to do the C15T replica. Now you saw the better photograph at the end of the last video, so you know what we're aiming at. But as I say, I had a couple of thoughts and I need to show you a couple of things, and then we'll get a little bit more specific about the plan and actually start dismantling it. Now, as I mentioned last week, the sort of main point or the starting point for this is going to be this back wheel. It was this back wheel that got me thinking maybe I'll just redo it as a road bike, but no, as I say, I don't want to. But when I was taking a closer look at the back wheel, I noticed this, which I hadn't before. You see the welds? Now, unlike virtually all the other bikes we've done, this one, and sort of modern bikes, doesn't have a bolt-on sprocket. The sprocket is part of the brake drum. So once that sprocket was worn, you had to get another brake drum, which obviously somebody didn't want to do. So they put the brake drum in the lathe, turned off that amount, got a sprocket, turned the inside out the sprocket, and welded the two together. Now, I haven't taken a close look to see how straight it is or how concentric they put it on, but that's what they did. Now, this has got 55 teeth. Standard C15 had 46. 45 or 46. Funnily enough, it lists it 45 or 46 for sidecar. I honestly wouldn't fancy putting even a little sidecar on one of these. But anyway, so we might end up, if it's absolutely perfect, see the teeth aren't bad. In fact, the teeth are pretty good. So as we're thinking about this, you know, somebody might use it for what in the UK is green laning, you know, just off-road use. That might be fine, being that little bit bigger. I haven't checked the gearbox sprocket yet. I think there were two sizes for that, 16 and 17. So we'll see what the overall gearing is. But anyway, I just thought I'd show you that somebody had made that mod. All right. Let's go to the front end because there's something sort of semi-major there as well. Now I've put it up on the jack because we're going to start and play around with wheels, as they are going to be the major point for this. But you remember I found the other pair of forks. Now I got to measure a little bit more, and the forks were a ½ an inch further apart. They were a ½ inch wider. That didn't bother me. It would have meant making a new wheel spindle, but it's not a difficult wheel spindle. It's not even threaded. It's just fatter in the middle because there isn't the usual spacing tube between the bearings. But they're 2 inches longer. And if I'm going to put a 21-inch front wheel in here instead of the 17, and I'm going to put a 2 inch longer set of forks up, it's going to lift this front wheel up, and it's really going to stick the forks out, which I definitely don't want. So we're going to start and do some jacking up and blocking the wheels up to get to what we think the heights will be, and then we'll measure the fork angle. But I've got a feeling I'm going to use these again because we come back to the back wheel. Because I can't get the bigger back wheel in there, I'm stuck. I can make all these mods to the front and keep moving it out like that, but I can't lift the back up to bring the front in. So let me see if I can get a wide enough view so you can see what we're going to do with various bits of wood and the jack. Right, so I've got basically the whole bike in so you can see what we're doing. And you'll have to excuse me because I'll probably keep walking backwards and forwards in front of you. Now then, as I say, back wheel is our determining factor. Because the best we're going to get in here is an 18 by 350. Now that is only going to make the radius of this wheel about a ½ inch more. Because basically the tyre wall size is going to be negligible difference and the wheel is going to be 1 inch wider diameter, so it's going to be a ½ inch more on the radius, so that's going to affect this. So a bit of ½ inch wood. See if I can get this lifted up without it falling over. There we go. Right, so there's a bit of ½ inch wood. That wheel spindle now is as high as it's going to be. Now, see, I've lost my tape measure already. What have I done with it? Anyway, a front wheel with a 21-inch tyre on is approximately 13.5 inches. This is 11.5. So we're looking at raising this up 1.5 inches. So a bit of what is nominal 2x4, it's actually 1.5 inches. So we're going to put that under there. So let's lift the front up. The back end's heavy, so I think the front end lifts up. And yes, we know when you sit on it and all the rest of it, the suspension's going to change, but you can't be taking all those variables into account. You've got to sort of work empirically, and we'll just take it as it stands. I don't have these tight, so there's no compression on the suspension. So we're just going to take it so it's got the weight on it. Alright, now then, what does that do to our fork angle? Right, that's already 31.8. Okay, now I think before I did this it was about 28 degrees. The trials bike is 26. On a road bike, well, the yellow peril we did, right, we were aiming at 29, 30 for that, and so that is far too long. I mean, it'll be a, that is good, look, now it's settled down, yeah, 31.9. The longer we put the forks out, the more stable the ride in a straight line. Which is why the forks on the Scrambles bike are at more of an angle, or a longer angle, than the Trials bike. The Trials bike, you want it to be able to turn quickly. But on the Scrambles bike, very often you're going in a straight line. But more importantly than that, you're doing this over bumps. And if anybody's ridden a Trials bike and caught a rock, the front will turn like that. Well, that's fine on a trials bike, you might end up on your ear, but if you're doing 50 miles an hour down a straight and you hit a bump and it deflects the wheel, you don't want that, so you need straight line stability. But we don't with this. I mean, for a road bike, a bit, yes. So what can we do? Well, that's with a 21-inch front wheel. Now, if we put a 19-inch front wheel in, that's going to take 1 inch off it, and only about 1 inch, because a 21 by say 3 or even 2.75, which is your average front one, that's the 13 inches, 13.5 inches. But if we put a road type tyre on, or a tyre that's not so narrow, it's going to have a bigger wall. So what we're losing in diameter, we're going to gain in wall height. So it's probably only, same as the back, it's probably only going to be the change in diameter here. So if we go from 21 to 19, that's 1 inch. So we only want a ½ inch at the front. So let me grab a piece of ½ inch and we'll change this. Actually, thinking about that, taking the tyre into account, I got my, what did I say, 13.5 inches from actually measuring a 21-inch wheel with a trials type tyre on, a narrow tyre. And we're there, look, we're 13 and a quarter with that 1.5 inches under. But because of the wall size, when we think about it, the tyre is going to be the same basically on both wheels, either a 17 or a 19. So actually what we're going to lift it up is 1 inch, because we're going from 17 to 19, which is 1 inch on the radius. So let's wind this up. So you see, we're not going to change much because we're only going from 1.5 inches to 1 inch. So we'll stick a couple of pieces of 1/2 inch plywood under. Lay it down. Now let's see what we're reading. See, we're still only, we haven't come down much, half a degree, 31.35. So what else can we do? Well, with that decent sized rear sprocket on the back, I don't know if you can see it, but we've got a big gap between the chain and the swinging arm. We've got enough to be able to drop the swinging arm, which in effect is the same as raising the back end. We could put longer shocks on. These are quite short. In fact, I went out to the box of old rear suspension units I had. See, I'm getting bilingual again, shocks, rear suspension units. And these are quite short. I didn't have any that were anywhere near this. They are only 10 3/4 inches long. Probably why they put them so far down here. But if we put some longer ones on, we're going to, because it's going to pivot there, it's going to kick that up like that, because this is going to move up, so it's going to lift that up. So it's going to lift the whole bike up. It's going to bring the front in. So let me take these off, and what we'll do is we'll just use the jack, leave this rear wheel sitting down on its 1/2 inch, because that's where it's going to be to the wheel spindle, and with the jack we can lift this up and see how it affects the front. Right, I've taken the bolts out the top, and here's a little aside. They're both British Standard fine. I needed to use 2 different spanners, because on this one it's got a small head and a large nut, and this one has got a large head and a small nut. That's what happens when you're working on old bikes. So let's start to raise it up and see what it looks like when we get it to, let's aim for 30 degrees. Now that's disconnected from that, I'm hoping the front end is heavy. So the back end will lift up. There it goes, yep. Joggle it a little bit to get our loosen. Oh, we're catching on these now, but I got it to 30.5, so if we can drop that a little bit more, that'll work. So let's look at our 2 things here. Where are we at now? Now we're at 11.5. We're getting towards a more standard size. You can't see it, but I've come round here and we're still a good 1/2 inch, maybe only 3/4 clearance between the swinging arm and the chain. And that, don't forget, is at rest, so when it's down and the wheel compresses, the chain will lift up. So I think that's what we can do. We're going to put, and obviously if I raise these 2 inches by using that other fork, we'd be miles out. So it's going to be 18,350 in the back, 19,325 in the front, and let's say a 12 inch, are we looking at? What did I say that was, 11.5? Yeah. And a 12 inch rear suspension unit should give us the geometry we want. And also it won't be as noticeable, but it will give us a bigger front wheel to rear wheel look as well. And that'll keep it more road oriented. As I say, we're going to use the dual sport type tyres. We're not going to use knobbies or the square type like a Dunlop Trials Universal. So the reason this has been important is all the other stuff we can start stripping it. But I wanted to know about this because now I can phone, let's say, probably Devon Rim and say to them, okay, 18-inch rear for a BSA hub. I was looking at the parts books, and the hub in the B40 and the hub, the actual hub itself, in the C15 have a different part number. But the nave plate is the same size for both of them. The brake shoes is the same part number for both of them. So the hubs have got to be the same. So I think, as I say, I can just use the part number for the 18-inch B40 rim and spokes and we're fine there. For the front, unfortunately the B40 had an 18-inch front as well. So I'll talk to them about getting a 19-inch front. So if we know we're fine for the wheels, I can get on, I can order rims, spokes, and I can order tyres. We can start dismantling this. And we now know, of course, that we've got to cut these off because we can't get the swinging arm to go down. It's like the Royal Enfield actually. You know, the Royal Enfield has these loops here for the pillion and they just fit in. They just stick in too much, so they are quite short units as well. But when you take the pillion loops off, the swinging arm will drop lower. So alright, that I think is our major point for the plan. The rest is just replacement. As I said, we'll get some alloy mudguards. We've got to make some mudguard stays up, but that's something. You'll notice from the photograph of the C15T, it had the ordinary big sheet metal type rear number plate holder. I've never ever liked them. I think they're as ugly as sin. But this, right, the Monster has got a nice aluminium one. So providing I can sort of form it into the shape of the alloy mudguard, polished up, that will look really nice. Now also you'll notice that it had a black headlamp, not a chrome one. And I think it looked nice with the black one rather than the chrome one. So we'll get a black headlamp. Or, if I've got a nice chrome one that's a bit rusty, but the small size, for instance, there's the ones that was on the B25s, because it's got too many holes in it for switches and things, but it's a small headlight that should go on. So if I have one of these, I can always paint it black, because this one, the chrome's pretty good, but some of them I've got aren't as good, but I still have the problem of all those holes in the top, which I don't want. All I want is a light switch. It's got a light switch here, it's got a toggle switch as well. Because we're putting electronic ignition on, we're not going to need an ignition switch. I suppose I could put an ignition switch in instead of a kill switch, and then it would give it some security. You wouldn't be able to start it. That's maybe a good idea actually. But I noticed the T one had a little one of the press button type light switches like the B44 had on the headlamp. It didn't seem to have one there, but we'll look and see what's what. I mean, there's holes drilled and everything there, so we might just put them down there and use a one-piece headlamp up here. But as I say, all those things we can do as we go along, whereas the wheels, we had to have that sorted before we started the project at all. Okay, so let's start taking things off and see what's what. Right, well, now we've taken these bolts out, of course, that just lifts off because it's the captive type 1. Homemade base, look. Well, homemade saddle. It's a piece of galvanised sheet. Okay, now this is interesting. Again, like those 2 bolts there, you start working on old bikes, particularly if people haven't been replacing bolts with the correct ones. The Whipple spanners wouldn't fit this right, or sockets, but a plain ordinary 9/16 one does. So it'll be interesting to see how we fix this tank on here. You notice he's got the great big old type of rectifier on it. This looks like a big standard bolt. I've welded a nut on. Yeah. Well, they haven't, fortunately they haven't welded it on, but they've got a big column nut here. I'm sure there's a bolt underneath, or connector nut, whatever you want to call it. So they've put a short bolt in, screwed this on, and then that goes on. Actually, it's not a bad way of doing it, but to be honest, you know, the correct bolt is only a few dollars, so why they did that. Now this type of tank doesn't have the rubber. It actually has, where those washers would have been on the Yellow Peril, it's actually sort of welded in, so it bolts down onto these rubber snubbers, which again are a casting that's braced onto this cross tube. So that's that. Now then, so there we go with that. Obviously we're going to be changing those handlebars. Ignition coils here on a cross piece. So I'll take the toolbox off. I'll show you this side in a minute. There's actually an old battery in there. We'll take the coil and that stuff off, and then we can look at this side a bit more. Yep, just as I go around, I'll show you this that I just found. Taking the seat off. There are 2 sort of welded on mountings for the rear mudguard. There's sort of a strap that's welded on. Both of them are broken, so they've just drilled through the frame loop here to mount the rear mudguard. And speaking of the rear mudguard, I had to lean it over to get at that. We're going to have to kick this up a little bit for the mudguard. Well, here we don't have a much bigger wheel, but on the T it's kicked up slightly, and we'll do that just to keep the look. This is a sort of place where if you want to actually bend them up so you're going to heat them, it's really difficult, because you've got to keep, unless there's 2 of you, you've got to keep both sides at the same temperature so that they'll bend with the same amount of pressure. Because if this side is hotter than that side, when you try to bend it up, you'll get more resistance there. This will bend, and not only will it come up, but it'll go over like that, because this side's going to bend more. So what I might just do, put a little pie cut in both sides, exactly the same size, kink it up, weld it, grind the weld out. You won't know, and it, instead of just having a little curve there, it'll just have a little kick up, but it'll look fine. So let's get round to the toolbox. Now you'll see here that after you would take the outer cover off, there's this inner piece, which is the sort of mounting for the outer cover, and it's mounted in 3 places, there, there, here and down here. Now normally I've squirted a bit of coil on here. I try these before I start the video because you don't want to watch me fighting with nuts and bolts, and actually all of these just came loose. So that is going to come out of there. That other C15 I didn't have this, so I had to do some clever stuff to make mountings for the outer cover. Oh, that's got a nut on the inside. Oh, but just, oh, it's just starting to get tight there. Now then, that's not going to be a Whitworth, is it? Because somebody's just put that. Oh, it is. I wonder if that's the original bolt and the one down here isn't. I'll look in the parts book. Ah, I might be seeing a little bit of original colour under here. No, I don't think so. It's different to what that is, but I don't remember them being that colour. Okay, and finally, this one goes through onto a tapped little extension on the frame. So that comes off like that. A little bit of tape holding the wires on. Battery's been leaking. These here, I don't know if I've ever shown these, in the USA are what are called wire nuts. First time I saw these, I couldn't believe them. I needed to make some connections. I went to the hardware shop and asked for a terminal block. Fella didn't know what I was talking about. So when I explained what I wanted to do, he said, oh, you want wire nuts. And what it is, as you can see, this sort of plastic cone, it's actually broken off. Inside there's a little metal core which sort of has a thread on it. You just jam your wires in, screw that on, and that's how you make a connection. And I sort of said to him, you're joking. And he said, oh no, no. And sure enough, these have just had it. Hold on a second. So I'm going to clip these wires. Right. Now then. For now, I'm going to take this piece off, the inner piece, and leave the oil tank on because I want to see where the oil lines are for the high level pipe. So let me sort out the last couple. I can see a bolt through there. Get this off with its wires. This hole, by the way, as you can see, lines up with that. The air filter goes in there. Now that I've taken that off, I had to disconnect the oil tank to get this centre piece off. But you can see here another, look, see that how there's a casting and then this subframe is bolted onto that. If you're wondering what this little thing here is, it's actually bent down. There's another one back there, it's to put a pump on. This would have a big rubber snubber in to match the rubber snubbers on that cross piece at the front, and then the tank is pulled down onto them. So let me take the ignition coil off and the rectifier off. So there's the ignition coil and its bracket off. I'm not going to need that. And as I say, there's the big old type of rectifier, which isn't connected to anything. We're not going to need that because we're going electronic. Let me see if you can see. No, let me swing you down a second. Yeah. Whoops. You can see where the battery leaked. This piece, which is the battery carrier and has sort of brackets on it for the tinware to fit on, that comes off. These brackets on the frame are bolted on, or sorry, welded on. So I'm leaving them on because I want to put the oil tank back on, as I said, to find out where the exhaust pipe is going to go. So let me bolt the oil tank back on, and then we can get the rest of these wires off. I was just thinking, you know, seeing as we've got the smaller wheel and tyre on the back, on here, I'm saying on here, yeah, seeing as we're going to have the smaller wheel and tyre on, I'm going to swing you around again. Getting you dizzy today. Smaller wheel and tyre, and because we're dropping this, I probably don't need to lift that up, but I might do just to make the sweep of the mudguard look a bit better. We'll see when we get to that. Alright, so what else can I do? I'll take the mudguard off and what have you, and then I think what we'll do is cut those... Oh! Something else, hold on a second. We've got some bent bits. See how that's sticking up? That should be level. And also you can see, you remember around the other side, the swinging arm is resting on this pillion tube. I get my finger in there, it's about 3/4 of an inch. So that looks as if it's been hit and twisted up, and perhaps the other side's been bent up from there, or there's actually somebody's welded a bracing piece across, which shouldn't be there. So as I say, we'll cut these off and then we can take a little look at them, and I'll measure and see if I can. Now I'm looking for 12 inches. I might be able to find a pair of rear suspension units we can put on, and we can play around and look at that a little bit more as well. Well, I was just going to knock off for the day, and I saw the postman arriving with a package, so I went out, and it's the side panel. But it's not a good way to finish the day, because look, there's the mounting. That is 8 inches between centres. That's 8 7/8. So that doesn't go anywhere near that backing plate. Absolutely. You see, look, big, sticks out all round there, sticks out at the top end here. So that's annoying. That's money wasted. Okay, well, we'll press on tomorrow. Right, well, I've got over my little fiscal disappointment. So you may have noticed when I was showing you the side panel, there was a little bit of wood laid next to it. I have made a 12-inch long dummy rear suspension unit, so we can put this in and make a look at things. Also, I'm sure some of you thought of this. I've put the little nut on the little bolt head, and so at least I only need 1 spanner for each, but I still need 2 spanners. Okay, so let's have a look. This has a step on it, this 3/8, but that has a step that takes it up to a 1/2 inch. So put the 1/2 inch one on there, and if I fasten down the front, which you can't see me doing, so the front can't rise up when I do the jack, the back should rise up. There it goes. Oh, we have to do another job first, don't we? Because you're all shouting, it's resting on that. Yes, it is. So what we'll do is we'll just, both sides, we'll just cut off, because I don't know exactly where I'm going to want this. We'll just cut off enough so that it's not catching. And it's not that it's catching on the footrest, it is the actual tube. So let me go and get the grinder. Right then, as I say, I'm just going to cut this off here. I think I can get in with this. I took the silencer off, but now I'm going to take the exhaust pipe off so I can come in this way so the sparks go away from me. Here's a little tool dodge for you, which doubtless somebody will say you shouldn't do that. But when I first started working the tank farm and we were taking great big bolts out of things, and I've seen guys in refineries as well, if your spanner isn't giving you enough oomph, you've generally got a pair of spanners with you, right? So you put that one on there like that. And you've got 2 lengths. There you go. Health and safety people shout at me, but refinery guys have been doing that for years. Right, we'll try again. Right, there's one. Would you believe it? The cable's not quite long enough. Right, I'll cut the other side off and bring you back. Now I think we're up and running. Get that out of the way. There we go. Actually, you might even need to be 12.5 because that's once that swung round, look, was almost there. Let's see, we'll pop this in here. So we've still got our bit of 1/2 inch plywood under the wheel, so the wheel spindle's at the right height. So now what we'll do is move you. Starting to get a bit cluttered here. I've got to do some tidying up. Alright, so as I say, we've got our 1/2 inch piece of plywood. So that wheel spindle is the right height if we've got an 18 by 350 in, or near as damn it. Here we've got, I've lost it again, hold on a second. Here we've got, and I'm going over this again because you might have forgotten since the other day. We've got the height 19 inch wheel, that's 9.5 inch for the radius, and about 3 inches, 3 and a little bit for the wall of the tyre, which gives us 12, 12.5, something like that. Actually, we're a little high, look, we're at 13 there. So, anyway, let's see what we've got there. Hang on, make sure we're not on the bulk, on the jack. There we go. $29.25. Okay, so there's a little bit of leeway. So a 12 inch rear shock I think would be good. Let me get this so it's not going to fall over. Okay, now at that rate we could almost put a 21 inch front wheel in here, except we wouldn't have the clearance here. And if we put the forks in, if I had some forks which was just a little bit longer, that would be nice, but if I put the other forks in, that would really I think kick the front out. Tell you what, let me, because I honestly I'm not keen on these forks. I mean, they're not that much thinner in the stanchions and what have you, but they're just don't look it. So hang on, let me fiddle about a minute and bring you back. Right, so been giving it some more thought, and I think I've finalised what I'm going to do, so I can continue with the dismantling and a couple of other things. First of all though, there seems to be a little bit of a confusion about exactly what I am doing with this bike from the comments. I'm not going to build a C15 trials bike, right? I'm going to build a road bike which is going to be a replica. In other words, it'll just look like the C15T. So it doesn't have to sort of perform as the C15T. So I'm not worried about putting pucker trials tyres on it. I'm not worried about the size of the back tyre or the size of the swinging arm or any of the things that people have mentioned about what I should do for a C15 trials bike. Alright, so don't forget, it's a road bike, it's just going to look like the trials bike. So what have I decided? Okay, back end, as I said, 18 inch rim, 350 tyre. Okay, now I can one of the things has been, as I've looked at these, not only the sizes of the wheels, but finding somebody, because I don't want mismatched treads, finding somebody that made the two sizes that I wanted. Now because of that, it's proving almost impossible to get a 19-inch front. So I did a bunch more measurements, did some more reading, and what I've decided is this: we're going to keep these forks. Again, it's just going to be on the road, it's a lightweight. We're going to put a 21-inch front wheel in. Now even with a 21-inch front wheel in, and again, because it's going to be used on the road, I don't need a huge gap for the mudguard. I actually only going to be to the top of the mudguard about 14 inches. And that gives me 5.5 inches of fork travel, which for a lightweight road bike is fine. If need be, I'll put the little bit in here, the same as the Works Riders did, just to restrict it. But from measurements, you know, measuring from here to there, and also parallel with that, measuring how much distance I have there, so how much that can move, and how I can stick, I think, and still have basically the 5.5 inches of travel that these forks have. So it's going to be 18,350 at the back, 21.3, and again I'm going with a wider tyre because it's going to be on the road, not on the track. I mean, whoever I sell it to might decide, oh, I can make it into a trials bike. Well, then they can do the difficult bits with the engine and so on, moving the engine over. So anyway, I think for a road bike that'll be fine. 21.3, 18.3.5. I found a couple of people that make them in one type of tyre, so I get matching treads. I think that'll be fine. That's it. We're using these forks. We can use those ear lugs. They need to be slightly modified. They're about 3/8 of an inch too long, which I've got space. See, if I put that on there, it's just fractionally too long, but you can see how low the ear is. We can cut that off, make a little piece to go in there. We also have to make a little piece here because that is wider than that is, but that's nothing. We can get all that done. Actually, I want bent, so it'll have to be straightened. Looking at the photograph again, I noticed that actually the headlight doesn't have a press switch, it has a little flick switch and what looks like one warning light. So we'll get a suitable small headlamp to go on there. We'll put a pair of, not necessarily a pair of trials handlebars, but that sort of shape to keep us on the right track. The other couple of things, I'm going to bring you in to show you them individually. Exhaust pipe. Now I think I am going to build this myself because I already have all the bits in stainless steel to do it, so it'll save a little bit of expense and I can make sure it goes exactly where I want it to. Now then, we'll make it in 1.5 because that's what I have, and that's about the smallest I can buy here in the States. This is slightly less than 1.5. It is say 1 3/8. Now that's really handy because the tubing I buy is 16th wall, so the inside diameter is 1 3/8 basically. So I can get a little piece of 1 3/8 to fit in there that'll just stick out, and then when that's welded on, it'll look fine. Now the reason I decided to make it myself was because I had a little play around with a couple of pieces that I have. That's the alloy tube that I bought to make the Enfield one, because remember it had the Enfield silencer anyway, and I bought a U piece so that I could make 2 silencers. But anyway, it turns out that if I put that on there and I put that on there, that's about spot on. These come in 2 different sizes, the 90 degrees. That's a long one, that's a short one. So what I would do is use 2, like that. and then with the straight piece we'll come off that with a little curve and then a little curve out the back end, because that will fit through there nicely without touching the oil lines. Right, so it'll curve, will come down, it'll curve in so that it goes around that, follow that, and then just curve out at the back end to go on the starter. So that's the exhaust. Let's look at footrests. Now the footrests are on lugs on tapers, and unfortunately the two tapers are different on both sides, which annoyed me, because when I was looking at them I thought, wait a minute, if I take these off, because this one is here, the one on the other side is more that way, I thought if I take these off I could just about put the one from one side on this side and then just swap them over, because that's the one from this side, it would have gone like that. That's the one from the other side, and you see I wanted them, let me just make sure I've got you in there. Yeah. By the photograph they're just underneath that engine mounting bolt, so they're here. And look at that, it's just in the right spot, and it's the same with the one on the other side, but unfortunately they don't fit on. But what I can do with them is I can mount them on here. Little bit of slight modification and they will go on there. Right, so that's what we're going to do with footrests. This here is the centre stand mount, and it's really, again it's a casting, it's really hefty. And it has a lip there for the centre stand to sort of come up against. So if I put a piece on the back of this to match with that lip, that will lock that in position so it won't do that way. So then we just sleeve it, put it on. What we'll do is we'll make a sleeve with the lip and weld it in, and that'll just bolt on there fine. And I can do the same with the other side. I can use this, modify it, and it's going to be right there where I want it to be. So that's the footrest sorted. What else? I suppose I should have mentioned this with wheels, but we're going to go with the 12-inch rear suspension units. Now checked, 12-inch ones are available from 2 or 3 different people, so that's fine, we can do that. Foot brake, the rear brake is just a case of shortening the pedal on the other side, because from the photograph again they use the same mount. We know we're going to swap the prop stand over. What else? Oh, look at this side panel. I think I can salvage this because, now we may remember I mentioned that those holes are closer together than those holes. 7/8 of an inch actually. But when I was looking at it, right, find that if I line the top hole up, you see that? I'm pretty sure that the sort of the length of that rim round to about there is about the same length as that, just shaped slightly. I think I can work that. See what I mean? If that goes in a bit, that might fit that. And if I fit that like that, this top mount is by that top hole. Okay. Now then, the interesting thing then is, I'm trying to keep all this so you can see it. The same thing happens at the bottom. I can reshape that to fit that, and when I do that, I don't think you can see this, but anyway, that bottom mounting fits that hole. Okay, so what I'm going to try and do is, I'll look to see which way sort of the symmetry goes. I'm going to cut this in 2. Well, what I'll do, so that it's rigid, is I'll make it fit the top, I'll make it fit the bottom, then we're going to cut it in 2, clamp it up, put the bolts in and everything like that, and then of course here, on this side, then there'll be a gap. Then we're going to make a piece to fit in that gap, and it's either going to be really clever or it's going to go in the rubbish. But I thought we might as well try it. I mean, it's bought and paid for. I guess from the original one they decided to slightly change the shape of things for the later models, and this is a later model C15. So anyway, that's what we're going to do with that. What else? As I say, the brake pedal mounts there, so I'm going to take a little piece out to bring it up so it's nice from the footrest mount here. So we're going to have the footrest, you know, as I say, about there underneath that engine mount. So we'll just bring it in a little bit, I think. I might do some measurements off the drawing. Who knows, they might have left it right. We'll stick a boot on, see what size is what. Going to go with the Amel monoblock because this carb was complete except for a top, and I had a top that fitted. So we'll get a rebuild kit and what have you, and I'm hoping it hasn't been used too much, it isn't worn. That'll save us that. Okay, and as you may remember, we are going to put the electronic ignition on that replaces the alternator, and that'll do ignition and lights, so everything is fine when we come around to do the engine. So that, I think, is the plan for everything. Right, so that's the plan for it. I think I know everything I need to know. I'm going to find out about the rims. I had mentioned that, you know, you can get rims in all sizes, that's right, but for those of you who watched the videos on wheel building, it's not just about the size, it's about the way they're drilled so that the spokes point in the right direction. So I've got to get rims that will match up with the hubs. So I'll order them. I'm actually going to order tyres as well. We will make the exhaust next week because I want to know where it's going with everything on, and also we'll probably have to put a bracket on to mount the silencer. So I don't want to take things apart and then have to put them together again. We're going to use standard BSA tank, I've decided, so I can put the badges on. That is probably going to be the single most expensive thing on the entire bike, because I haven't seen many for sale and I want one with perfect chrome, so I might have to buy a new one. Suspension units also will be moderately expensive, but all in all, not too bad. Alright, so that's it for this week. I'll start taking things like mud guards and that off because you don't really need to see me doing that. But as I say, next week we'll make the exhaust and decide how we're putting the silencer on, so that will be finished. What I'll do is, I don't have to worry about the swinging arm, but I'll put a rear suspension unit in. I can even put one of the short ones back in, just so that I know we're going to clear that, because obviously I could make it to go around this bit of wood, and this bit of wood's only ½ inch thick, so we've got to have a rear suspension unit in there for that. And then I might make some measurements and decide whether I want to kick this end up. As I say, kicking the back end of the frame up is more to make it just look the part. Little bits and pieces to order, like a new rubber for there and what have you. So, as I say, that's it for now. So until next week, take care and enjoy yourselves.